Good morning. Congratulations on surviving our daylight savings time here in the United States, a strange and non-futuristic tradition. My name is this going to work today? There we go. So my name is Amy Webb, and I'm just checking a piece of technology on the back end before I get going. So 3 quick things about me. I'm a quantitative futurist. I'm a professor of strategic foresight at the NYU Stern School of Business. I'm the founder of the Future Today Institute. We've been around for 15 years. Trends is part of what we do. We advise Fortune 100s, Global 1000 companies. We work with the federal government, not this federal government, but previous federal governments. We work with testify. We work with lots of different organizations all around the world. And if I have managed to get my very complicated system working, theoretically there is a Twitter back channel that should be live, and I should be live tweeting resources and links and all kinds of additional information as I'm talking up here. And if it's broken, it's broken. But if you follow Tech Trends 2018, you should be able to see that. All right, so 3 quick things about you. You have self-selected to be here on a Sunday morning post-daylight savings time. So this means that you're already paying attention to emerging trends. And I point this out to you because some of the things that I'm showing you may sound a little familiar already. However, knowing what the tech trends are isn't enough. The whole point of this is that you have to start making connections early between the trends, otherwise you miss things. And I guess the last thing about you is that you're all going to walk away with a copy of the report. Earlier in last year, open sourced all of my IP. So everything is in the public domain, and I'm going to send you a link at the end of this presentation to the report. And I'm very interested in everybody getting to action. So I've curated a folder full of research that you can take back, repurpose as you'd like, share it with your colleagues, do whatever you want with it. So I like that. I like the applause at the beginning. It motivates me to keep going. All right, so this is the 11th annual edition of our report. To date, it's seen 6 million cumulative views. And this year's report is very large. So we've identified 225, which was just an accident, 225 emerging tech trends, plus a bunch of weak signals for 2019 across 20 different industries. One of the biggest problems everybody faces when they start thinking about emerging tech trends is that they only pay attention to the trends in their own industries, and that is a huge mistake. In order to see the future of one thing, you have to simultaneously pay attention to the future of many things. And before we go forward, let's talk about where we've been. So 2017 was a really strange year. Outside of the United States, in Russia and in China, really hope that those 2 leaders win their re-elections. They're going to be in power for longer. Here in the United States, there's been this mass exodus from the White House. And living in Washington, D.C., let me tell you that there are literally ones of people lining up to take over these jobs. Ones of people. So ICOs were the new IPOs. How many people know what an ICO is? That's because you're all following the super trendy cryptocurrency chain, right? So, and if you haven't been following cryptos and Bitcoin, let me just spell it out for you this way. So the chairman of Uber is launching his own cryptocurrency, right? Because cryptos are the big thing. Kodak, which I know all of us think of as a futuristic company. They always get the future right? They're launching a cryptocurrency. So everybody is headed into initial coin offerings, ICOs. We've been seeing this for the past year. Since last year, we now have toothbrushes that have artificial intelligence because toothbrushing is a difficult thing for us all to do. So let's apply machine learning to that process of wiping away our cavities. Toilets have AI, right? So you can now buy this toilet and ask Alexa to flush it for you, which totally makes sense. In the past year, you've been able to do other things. So you can't yet plug your personal brain into your car, but Nissan is working on some interesting technology to allow us to be more interoperable with the cars that we ride in. And of course, we hear this constantly, right? The robots are going to come and kill us all, but not before they take all of our jobs. That's right. There are robots, the robot baristas. You've probably seen a few robot baristas. If you've been to the Google house, there's a robot sock sorter. Robots are creating interesting new compound chemicals to build structures. Robots are not just, able to drive cars, they're now also able to drive trucks. And if you're feeling anxious about the robot overlords coming to take our jobs, you're not the only one. So if you're feeling anxious, it's okay. That's what I'm telling you. All right, so we've got whiz-bang technology all over the place. And this is actually a pretty big challenge. And the challenge that we face in the year 2018 specifically is, how do we distinguish between what appears to be something trendy and what's an actual real trend? Real trends share 4 common characteristics. And this is in the folder for you to take home. The first one is trends are driven by basic human needs. So these aren't just things that pop up because somebody had too much beer one night and came up with a cool idea. 2, trends are timely, but they tend to persist over long periods of time, which is why in our report, you'll see many of the trends have been on there for a decade or more. Trends evolve as they emerge. They're not static. So, we constantly are watching how, because there's so many dependencies, how trends are evolving as they interact with consumers and business and government and regulation and other technologies. And the fourth is that tech trends have dependencies and they have multiple points of convergence. They tend to materialize as what seem to be outliers. So stuff that's sort of bubbling up from the fringes that we don't pay attention to until it's too late. The emerging tech trends that you should be paying attention to usually are very difficult to encapsulate in a buzzword. The kinds of trends that you'll find in our report and the stuff that I pay attention to usually take a sentence or two to describe. And when you're confronted with a real important emerging tech trend for the first time, it's easy to dismiss. It tends not to seem like something that's important. And that's how so many people miss it. That's how all kinds of organizations filled with all kinds of very, very smart people miss really big, important events in technology. This is what happened to BlackBerry and to Kodak. It's what I like to call the cycle of doom. And it goes something like this. I've never heard of the technology, right? With a little bit more time, fine, it's dangerous, it's frivolous. A little bit more time passes, okay, fine, I get what it is, but how is this relevant to my business? A little bit more time, fine, it's probably useful for my business, but we've got other stuff going on. And then there's this acceleration, right? It's part of my daily routine. My kid uses it. My millennial friend in whatever section of the office uses it, right? To, damn it, how did we get so far behind? How did we miss it? So that's what I observe happening, but in practice, it looks a lot more like this, right? Which is, I've never heard of this tech trend before. Okay, fine, I get it. And then entropy. Fuck it, let's just do what we've always done, because we don't have time to create a new P&L, right? Or the alternate reality, which is, I've never heard of it, shit, let's make a cryptocurrency. So in order to escape this cycle of doom, that's the whole reason to pay attention to trends. So I'm hoping that that's why you're here, because the trends are the waypoints that we pay attention to en route to the future. So the whole point of this report is not to just dump it on you, have you recognize what's in there, and then you just go back to your whatever you've been doing. You need to use this stuff all year round to help inform your strategy. So quick note on the methodology, and then I'm going to lay all the trends on you. So this is a data-driven process. So anytime I'm looking at the future and my team is looking at the future of any one individual technology, we pay attention to dependencies. And we look at that technology through 10 different lenses, which we call the 10 modern sources of change. It's very, very reliant on data, and for the most part, it's quantitative data from all different kinds of sources, and all of those sources are different depending on what we're modeling and what we're looking at. We identify weak signals at the fringe, so we collect all of that data. We use pattern recognition to analyze patterns from that data so that we can spot emerging trends. And then that's not the end. So the trends are fine, but you have to activate them. So we use trends in order to build possible, plausible, and probable scenarios for the future. And the point of that is to calculate risk and opportunity. So we're not just interested in like what happens with Bitcoin. I'm much more interested in what are the implications, the second, third, fourth order implications as this technology and the mindsets change and regulations change and all of these other dependent factors. What does that future look like? And we do all of that for strategy. So this is what you do before you start developing your new products, your new services. This is the work that you do to make better strategic decisions in the present. And there's a data visualization inside of the chart that sort of just explains what this process looks like. And the whole point of me open sourcing it last year is because I want everybody to start doing this work. We're confronting a vast amount of unknowns going forward. Things are going to get more complicated, not less. And I want everybody to be making better decisions. So that's the purpose of open sourcing the methodology and the point of me sharing the trends with you today. So this year, 225 trends, 10-week signals for next year across 20 industry sectors. Each trend has some key pieces of information that I'm just going to highlight before I show you what it is. So there's a key insight, quick description of what this thing is that you could share with your boss or your friend over coffee or whatever, a bunch of examples from the present, and then a whole bunch of examples showing what's about to come next. And then we have a watch list where we name the people, the organizations, the companies that are doing the most work in this area that we think should be on your radar. And then finally, at the top, there's two key pieces of information. One, how many years this trend has been on the list. That's really important because it tells you something about the trajectory of that trend. And the second thing is, what action are you supposed to take? So there's a little matrix that says, okay, for right now, this just informs your strategy, or you got to act now, right? You got to do something about this now, or it's okay to just keep vigilant watch. So there's an indicator there that tells you what to do with this information. And the trajectory and timing are really important because of all of these dependencies that surround us. So just again, last piece of the methodology, we're not just looking at the technology, but what's the activity over the 10 sources of change? We're looking at academic research. We're looking at the proliferation of public-private partnerships, patent and IP protection activity. Where is all of the funding coming from? Not just here in the United States, but all around the world. Where are others trying to hack away at this technology and improve it in some way? And where are there areas of unexpected divergence and convergence? All right, and the end goal isn't just knowing what the trends are, right? It's making connections between them. So if we go back for a moment to Uber's cryptocurrency, that's so weird. It's weird to put those words together in a sentence. So if we go back to that for a moment, I wonder if they're also paying attention to the vast, vast, vast landscape of technologies and trends that all stand to impact the future of cryptos. This is just a tiny fraction. So if I was looking at the future of cryptos, I would also be tracking things like compute power, right? Because it takes a lot of power to mine this stuff and to create it and to share it and to spend it, which means I'm also paying attention to China. I would be looking at regulation. For some bizarre reason, here in the United States, people are not paying attention to the GDPR, which is the sweeping regulation that's about to hit Europe in May. That's going to have an impact on the viability of cryptocurrencies and of blockchain. Tariffs, net neutrality, there's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence pieces of this that need to be paid attention to, the electrical grid. I could go on and on and on. So if you really are interested in a crypto future, you have to pay attention to all of these other things and observe the connections between them. We make connections between all of these trends in order to escape the cycle of doom, right? And if you can do that, then you've got a cycle of opportunity, which is starting from the same place. I've never heard of it. But then you change your thinking. We're going to do some dedicated research. We're going to try to calculate the timing. We're going to have a first mover advantage. It's going to inform our strategy. We're going to motivate and engage our workforce. We're going to have a better brand positioning strategy or a better regulatory strategy. And we're going to, things are going to be great. We'll have sustainable growth. We'll have more information, and we'll be able to better plan ourselves for the future. So with that in mind, I'd like to highlight some key findings from our report this year. I'm going to show you 15 emerging tech trends that I think are some of the highlights and interesting pieces from the report. And I'm going to show them to you in 3 trend clusters that support those key findings, okay? And then I'm going to make connections between all of them and show you some plausible scenarios from the future, given what we know to be true today. So here's the first key finding. 2018 is the beginning of the end of smartphones. So all the phones that you're holding up in the air, this is the beginning of the end of that. And here are the trend clusters that support that key finding, but are also important for you to be paying attention to. And again, some of these you may have heard of before, but you're going to start to think about them in a new light. And they have to do with digital assistants, which we all know about, but also natural user interfaces, AR, MR, generative algorithms, face prints, and voice prints. All right, so let's go way back in time, 20 years to 1998. If you were, you're here, so if you were alive, right? Some of you weren't, which is like a horrible thing for me to be thinking about. If you were alive, you might have had a mini disc player. Let's just put our hand, well, this will be fun. Mini disc players? Yeah, I had one too. They were amazing. Did anybody have the Sony camera that actually had the floppy disk? You guys are hardcore nerds. 1998 was the year that Panasonic released its portable DVD player that you could carry around with you. Some of you may have had that. This is what a laptop looked like. And the Nokia 5180 was like the most, right. Some of you still have that phone because you love it so much. Okay. So in 1998, we're carrying around with us all of this technology, right? And if you were able to go back to the year 1998 and tell that version of yourself, 20 years from now, you're going to be sitting in a conference room listening to this lady on stage, and you're going to basically have all of that functionality in a singular device that you can put in your pocket that, for the most part, doesn't run out of battery, right? You would have laughed at yourself. So I'm telling you that because I don't want you to have that reaction what I'm about to show you, okay? So it's 2018. We're all sitting in here with various smartphones that have all of that functionality and more, okay? And what's starting to happen is that there's new technology bubbling up from the horizon, right? So there are new forms of, things that we can use for various purposes, and smartphones really haven't gotten that much smarter. They kind of peaked, right? So we're not seeing the kinds of sales upticks as we have in all previous years. And in fact, in the past quarter, we're now starting to see the sales drop off year over year. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, right? Part of the reason is we're just not throwing out and upgrading our phones with as much vigor as we used to be. But why? Well, the reason is because we're only starting to see incremental benefits. And if we only see incremental benefits, we're gonna, if we came from this, right, with all these tools and we merged into one phone, what we're doing again is merging back out, which is why we still have a phone. We've got smartwatches, we've got our fitness trackers, we have smart earbuds, and pretty soon we're gonna have smart glasses. I've seen plenty of prototypes and plenty of strategy plans that indicate that this smart glasses combined with smart earbuds, wristbands, and still a watch is where we're headed over the next probably 10 to 15 years. Okay, so let's set that aside. At the same time, this is another one of our key trends, right? Digital assistants have become ubiquitous. So whether it's Alexa or Google or Cortana or Siri or poor Bixby, Bixby. We are surrounded by digital assistants. And this is important because another set of our models show that within the next 10 years, we're going to be moving headfirst into conversational interfaces or non-visual UI. And I think that that's going to accelerate pretty quickly. So I would argue that by the year 2021, which is just around the corner, 50% of the people who live in industrialized nations, over half of the interactions, the aggregate interactions that they have with machines are going to be done using their voices, right? So our voices are going to be replacing what we do with our fingers and even with some of our gestures. This is important, and it connects to this other trend, which is deep learning for machine reading comprehension. So In short, let me explain to you what this means. So right now, if you were to type, what is a deep neural network, into Google or whatever your favorite search engine is, rather than just getting the answer, and there's some cases where you get semantic search answers back, more than likely what you get is a series of links. And that's about as good as most of the search can do right now. Machine reading comprehension is designed with the idea that just like humans can, right, the system would go through and read all the articles and then, if not answer the question, at least pull up in the article where that answer is, right? So I would type in what's a deep neural network, and boom, that's the answer to that question. This becomes really, really important because it lays the foundation for all of our future conversations with machines. So there's really interesting work being done at Microsoft and Stanford, if you're interested on machine reading comprehension. But let me show what this looks like to you in action, right? So this is my kitchen, which I know is shocking to you. So I asked Alexa in the kitchen, what's a deep neural network? So let me show this to you. Alexa, what is a deep neural network?
Neural network, a form of artificial intelligence based upon error.
Okay, so before I go on to voice prints, that probably doesn't seem shocking to any of you, but the underlying infrastructure of that is quite remarkable. And the very fact that I was able to have that kind of a conversation is rooted in this emerging trend, this machine reading comprehension. And that's important because that is what's getting built and baked into all of our systems going forward. Now, that doesn't work without being able to recognize our unique voices. So voice prints are another one of our trends for the coming year. And essentially, I mean, this is probably common knowledge. We all sound pretty different, right? Even twins may have similar sounding voices, but their inflections, the unique speaking patterns, the unique dictation, the words that they use are quite different. And so we can use all of that information to create a voice print, not unlike a fingerprint that we might have. And so there's a lot of research and work being done across lots of different industries, certainly within Amazon and Google and Apple. And what's interesting is that voice prints don't just divulge your personal health and your age and your emotional state, right? I mean, it can do that. It doesn't just recognize words, but it can also do something really interesting, which is this type of technology can determine what kind of room you're in, what the walls are made out of. They can apply artificial intelligence tools and systems to figure out how many people, what the room density probably was. They can look at fluctuations in the local electrical grid, and just by listening to your voice and having no other information, get a pretty good approximation of where physically you were located at the time that you were speaking. Yeah, that should scare you. So this is some research out of MIT, and they're working again a lot in this area, and not just trying to hear and understand our voice prints, but replicate them. And they've gotten pretty good at it, so good to the point that it sort of passed an audio version of the Turing test. So the machine systems are so good at replicating these sounds now that humans can't really tell the difference. So if we combine all of this stuff, right, with new AI techniques, where do we wind up? You know, one of the things that we're seeing is that it's highly likely that we will have a conversation with a digital assistant in order to unlock it, right? And that passwords are probably going away as well. And the standard biometric scanning things that we're used to seeing, like thumbprints, iris scans, are probably going to start to subside over the next decade. And that leads us back to our faces. So the next trend in this cluster are face prints. So again, every person, you know, has a different bone structure, different physical characteristics of your face, but we also have different capillaries, right? All of the structures beneath our skin are all quite different. There's some very interesting research out of Germany that uses perceptual mapping. And basically, these are some thermal heat prints. But even if we shut off all of the lights in this room, different from using an infrared camera, which would just identify a person, this would be able to identify you specifically because of the unique characteristics underneath your skin. So there's the data that your face shows, right? But then there's all the data beneath your skin that we can now glean using face prints. NEC is doing some really cool, interesting work around generative techniques. So once you have a scan of somebody, right, a scan of their face, is there a way to turn that into a three-dimensional face print of them for security purposes? This is actually something you can do. So this is me in my home office playing around. This is somebody's graduate project at Oxford. And I rendered my own 3D face, which looks a little janky. But the whole thing took 30 seconds. And it's not like I had a supercomputer to do this. If we combine face prints with generative algorithms, this is more work out of Sxsw, but what you'll see on the left-hand side of each one of these columns is a still image. On the right-hand side, a machine learning algorithm has filled in the rest. So essentially, it's creating a video that never happened, okay? So the one that I find so interesting is on the bottom left. That's a person riding a horse. The resulting video, which is very small and a little fuzzy, never happened in real life, okay? So the person probably rode somewhere else, but that's not exactly what happened, and yet we're able to generate something from it. Which leads me to this. So some of you probably saw this happen earlier in the year. The University of Washington has used all of this technology that I just showed you, all of these trends, and they scraped President Obama's voice from an appearance he made on The View, and then generated this video of him talking. What's remarkable is that you'll see, the video on the right-hand side never happened in the real world, but it looks pretty good. It looks pretty presidential.
For other people, us being thoughtful about other people's traditions is something that Michelle and I try to teach our kids. You talked about what we talk about over the dinner table. A lot of what we talk about over the dinner table is,
So if we combine all of that, right, face prints with data mining and refining operations, it's important to look at this company. So this is a company called MEGV, which has something called Face++. Has anybody heard of this company before? That doesn't surprise me. This is probably one of the most important companies that you will encounter that nobody's heard of before. This is also a good opportunity for me to say, I'm not showing you any companies that we advise Microsoft, but nobody else that I'm showing you is a company that we work with. Full disclosure. All right, so this company is based in China. And what's so interesting is that they've applied the same technology that's going to cause us, right, to have no more smartphones, right, because we're going to have these other devices. They're using all of that technology in very interesting ways. So they're able to determine your body posture, right, and your unique gait, the way that you stand and carry yourself, and identify you using that information, as well as accurately scrape your face wherever you happen to be, and identify who you are. The reason that this is important is because it's deployed in China. China has 1.3 billion people. They have the government support and financing and funding to push a lot of this forward. It's been used in hundreds of thousands of applications, and China has very different restrictions around privacy than many other areas of the world. And as a result, we're starting to see some of the best trained machine learning algorithms come out of China. Which is why, if you go to China, you can now smile to pay. Okay, so if you purchase something on Alibaba or many other places, even if you've got crazy makeup on, even if you've seen those new tattoos meant to sort of trick the machine learning algorithms, it still knows who you are, right? So on the one hand, you can smile to pay. On the other hand, you can get publicly shamed. So if you live in China, I used to live in China, so this is a strange thing in some places, but not there. If you jaywalk, if you cross the street, this system will recognize your face. There's a billboard, an electronic billboard. It'll put your face on that billboard, along with your name, where you work, and it will publicly shame you for jaywalking. It'll also send that same information out over Weibo, which is a big social network there. Finally, augmented and mixed reality. So everybody's very excited about VR, virtual reality. Virtual reality got here a little faster, although its original purpose was as a therapeutic device for people dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome in the 90s. But within our context, VR seems to have popped up overnight. AR is on a slower but ultimately longer trajectory with more staying power. Magic Leap has finally released its SDK, and everybody loves to make fun of Magic Leap. But the people who are making fun of Magic Leap, I don't think have spent a time looking through all of the patents that they've filed and really looking at the technology that they're building. So this is what we're projecting for the next several years. So this is the revenue model that we've created between now and 2021. So this is the billions of dollars that we see moving. And as you can see, if there's an accelerated cycle, we're up in the 130 billion space for aggregate applications for AR. If it's delayed, still pretty good, right? So this is an area that we're going to start to see exploding again once we get to a place where we've got more connected wearables and glasses that provide us with more information throughout our day. Okay, so I've just shown you a bunch of trends, and I did it quickly. That's not enough. So you have to piece this stuff together to figure out what it all means, right? So let me show you. There are many possible scenarios, but let me spin out a few for you right now. So where does all of this take us between now and South by 2028? So again, the key finding here that we started with is this is the beginning of the end of smartphones, and these were the trends that we walked through. Okay, so we're going to make connections between all of these trend nodes and see how all of this plays out. So optimistically, if I were to use an optimistic framing, companies all work together, and right? And the operating systems become interoperable. So we don't have to pledge our allegiance to Alexa or to Google and the subsequent devices that come out as a result. Consumers have total control over their data. There's transparency. We can block ourselves from being tracked when we want. We're all wearing a combination of smart glasses, wristbands, and earbuds. We are information millionaires. We have better information about each other while we're interacting. I think this could be the end of social isolation, right? Because we'll be looking in each other's eyes again, not just staring down at our screens, which also could mean we have better security for all of our devices. All right, pragmatic framing. The developmental track, the transition away from smartphones, leads to all kinds of different portable operating systems that we use with our voices. We don't have interoperability between those devices, and consumers start to get really frustrated, and it stifles innovation, and it stifles development among the entire ecosystem that plugs into it. As a result, the ecosystem winds up developing along a much more decelerated track. Oops. And now the catastrophic framing. We wind up with a new digital divide. The wealthy people are the ones who get the best devices, and they get the best OSs. Everybody else is subjugated to a barrage of unwanted marketing information and other information. We realize way too late that the end of privacy started now, and that it's over by the year 2028, which leads to heavy-handed regulation, and we're all miserable. Now, if I were to apply a probabilistic model, given the data that I've got and what I know to be true, say there's a 50-50% chance that we are headed towards pragmatic or catastrophic framings. But don't fear, there are two more train clusters. So the second key finding has to do with artificial intelligence. So the trends that fall from that are coming next. So AI is already here. It just didn't show up the way that we all expected. And so the trends in this space are adversarial machine learning, generative networks, machine reading, multitask learning, and some other things. And don't worry, I'm not going to get super technical here. So it turns out we're all using AI every single day. AI has been in development for hundreds of years. It just doesn't seem or feel like AI anymore because a lot of what we use has just become part of our daily lives, right? In the cycle of doom, we're at that point now where we don't even recognize a lot of artificial intelligence technologies as truly smart, groundbreaking technologies because it's just part of our lives. And those are artificial narrow intelligence technologies. And that is when a system can perform a single or very narrow task as good or better than we humans can on our own. So for example, if you drive a car and it has anti-lock brakes, that's ANI. If you have a spam filter in your email, ANI. Automatic Spotify playlists, ANI. Your travel to get here to South by Southwest, you went through an airline security system, ANI. It's everywhere, right? And so you may be thinking to yourselves, ANI? What are you talking about, right? Because when I think about artificial intelligence, this is what I'm thinking about, right? Terrifying smart robots, Skynet, right? Or like the greatest show ever in the history of the planet, right? Westworld. We're thinking about hosts. And I know it's, difficult to acknowledge this out loud, but two of the biggest visionaries in the space constantly offer misguided information, right, about the real future of AI. Zuckerberg would have everybody think that AI is going to save us all and there'll be universal basic income, and I guess once we're all rich from universal basic income and automation, when the robots take our jobs, we're all going to be free to pursue our creative endeavors. That's totally what's going to happen. Right? And Elon Musk thinks that the killer robots are going to come and humanity is over. All right. When it comes to AI, it's not. When it comes to AI, there's a tremendous amount of misplaced optimism and fear. And partially that's because we've imposed biological characteristics on the ecosystem. And the thing is that AI is not one of the tech trends itself in our report, and it hasn't been for a long time. That's because AI represents the next era of computing. So we have 27 different trends that fit into this category, but we're just on a trajectory here. So the first era of computing was tabulation. The second was programmable systems. The third, which we're all in the middle of right now, is artificial intelligence. And ANI is only the beginning. So the first 27 trends of our report all have to deal with different facets of the artificial intelligence ecosystem. And I want to walk you through a couple of them now. This part of the report is vitally important. There's also a primer on AI for people who don't understand technology at all. It's really important going forward that we all level set and have just a practical understanding of what this is and what we're talking about so that we make smarter decisions. So the first has to do with reinforcement learning and hierarchical reinforcement learning. So over at the Sony Pavilion, the Sony WOW Pavilion, it's really cool. They've got a bunch of interesting technology. They have the next generation of Aibo, which is the little robotic dog, who is incredibly cute. And on the one hand, it's kind of scary. On the other hand, I want one for my daughter. So if you go there and it comes up to you and you speak a command to it and you pet its back, they will tell you that the petting the back is the reward. Because if you have a dog at home, right? You're trying to train your dog, it gives you, shakes your hand or something, you give it a treat. That's called reinforcement learning. When you do that to the robot dog, you're doing the same thing. So you are training the dog, like you are the trainer of the robot dog in real time, just like you would train your dog at home. This is important because within existing AI systems, and again, I hesitate to impose biological characteristics. I think it's a bad move going forward. But the first AI child was born within the system, and that child required the same kind of reinforcement learning, except that wasn't done by humans. So there was a neural network called AutoML that developed a child AI network for a very specific task. And this seems very complicated, but the short end of the story is there's this big system, it's cranking along, and it built a subsystem to go out and do a bunch of work for it so that the whole thing was much more efficient. The child's name was Nasnet, and just like a child, it got smarter through reinforcement learning. And its job, its task, was to go out and recognize objects like people's, cars, traffic lights, backpacks in real time. This is pretty remarkable if you consider how quickly we've gotten to this point. How many of you remember the big experiment where a research scientist trained a whole bunch of computers to recognize cats in YouTube videos? Do you remember that? That was that was not that long ago, okay? And so this just gives you an indication of how quickly we're accelerating. And the thing with this system is that it performed way better than everybody expected. So the child born inside The accuracy rating was at 82%, which is pretty good, and it outperformed systems that were made by humans. So another trend in this space has to do with adversarial networks and adversarial images. And again, think about when you were a child and how you learned, or if you're a parent, how you train your children, right? In order for them to understand right from wrong, they have to be shown, this is correct, this is incorrect. So the same thing happens when scientists are training their systems. So this is a washer and dryer. And what they did was intentionally introduce a tiny pixel that we would not be able to see. But that tiny little fissure in the system retrained it to recognize, at the very, very top, this is a safe. Instead of saying it's a washer and dryer, it's a safe and a washer, or a safe and a loudspeaker, right? By just tricking it with a tiny piece of misinformation. But that's partially how they learn. Well, now they're using that technique in order to train machines how to recognize patterns so that they can create new things, right? So that they can have a sort of imagination. This is what helps these systems learn going forward in unsupervised ways without a human. So this is how humans get taken out of the loop. And the work is being done at the University of Montreal. And again, all of this research is in that folder for you. And I'd recommend, it's an academic study, but I'd still recommend that you take a look through it. Because when you link all of that with this, which is multitask learning, another one of our trends, this represents a pretty big departure in the year 2018. So if you remember from Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, right? Daniel got so upset because he was working with Mr. Miyagi, painting his fences and doing things that seemed to have nothing at all to do with karate, right? And then Mr. Miyagi comes over and they have a big argument, and Mr. Miyagi goes to hit him, and suddenly Daniel knows karate, right? But that's what one of the trends is rather than training these systems in very narrow, discrete tasks, training them in multiple things at once so that they can do more interesting things. And it's that type of technology and that research which led us, to this. So you've probably heard about Alphabet's DeepMind algorithm, which was called AlphaGo, beating grandmasters in Go, right? You've probably heard about that. And you may have heard about this. So once the system was done beating all of the world champions, it retired, because what else is it going to do? Keep humiliating the humans over and over and over again? So what it did was they retired it and redeployed it. This time, they said, okay, we're going to give you a few parameters, but you have to go out, you have to learn how to play Go. But that was it. So the system was deployed to learn what Go was, learn how to play it, and then get good enough to play at the same level that it had before. That process took 40 days. Using all of the stuff that I've just shown you, these newer techniques, it got really good, and then within 70 hours started playing at superhuman strengths, right? In ways that nobody understood. And it kept beating the system and the other players over and over and over again, and that process took 70 hours, right? So this is important this is a key trend to be important to be paying attention to going forward, because it tells us something about the future of tech, right, and the future of these systems. So Google's AI now can create better machine learning code than the researchers who created it. And it's not just Google. So one of our big trends that I hope you all pay attention to going forward for 2018 is that we're starting to see a lot of consolidation in the AI ecosystem. These are the big 9, what I call the big 9 companies that control the future of AI. They're all partnering with academic institutions, but the money is flowing from here. There's a free flowing of research going back and forth. And so essentially our next era of computing, right, is in the hands of these 9 companies. And 3 of those companies, Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba, I would argue are probably the most important ones to be paying attention to. We're going to start to see more and more consolidation as we go through the year. And the thing is that these companies are constantly mining and refining and productizing our data. And I don't begrudge them that. These are for-profit companies, and they should make a profit. However, What this indicates is that over the next 20 years, the most important natural resource on the planet is us, right? If you've heard people say that data is the new oil, this is why. Because these systems don't work without data, and we are the ones generating the data. Which brings me back to China. So China has overwhelmingly invested more money at a sovereign state wealth fund money than everybody else combined. They've got commercial interests. They are the single biggest investor in US robotics and AI startups companies. And China doesn't just expect a 10x return like a traditional VC. They expect IP in return. And again, I don't begrudge China as a nation the ability to do this, but I do question what their end game is and whether that's good for the future of humanity. I don't have an answer to that just yet. And partially this is because not everybody agrees on how all of our data should be mined and used. And so that leads me to this sort of thorny and I think also really important tech trend for the year, and that is the emergence of splinter nets. So, we have a big worldwide internet right now, and what we're heading into is a series of regional internets, most likely, that function differently depending on where geographically you are. This already exists in China, and this already exists in Russia. This is probably going to start existing in other places too, like Brazil, and the United States, and Canada. This is just a small fraction of all of the pending court cases and regulation right now that exist around the world. Germany has gone back and forth on this, and I'm not entirely sure how they're going to implement it, but if you post hate speech, technically there is a pending piece of legislation that says that you could be fined, more than $50 million per instance. I will highlight again Europe, the sweeping GDPR regulations that go into effect this year. How they get enforced, I don't know, but it does impact the flow of data and the blossoming of the ecosystem. In China, Canada has to scrub pirated products Google has to scrub pirated products from search results, or it gets fined. There's hundreds of these little regulations and big regulations on the books, which means that we could be entering into a situation that looks like this, right? Where we have the internet behaving differently depending on where you are. If you're a journalist, if you're a blogger, if you're an Instagrammer, right? Just because you post something in the United States or in France doesn't mean that the country next to you, theoretically, is going to be able to see it. And what concerns me about this is that if you think we've had a problem with fake news in the past year, you have absolutely no idea what's coming. And if you combine splinter nets with artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, my question to you is, what happens when our workforce shrinks, right, but our economies and businesses still grow? What happens when we meet, that's like an inflection point that concerns me, because I think one outcome of that, in my modeling, suggests that different states might allow, at least here, might allow automation in factories with tariffs, without tariffs, taxing the robot income, not taxing the robot income, while other states don't. We could have a mess on our hands here in the United States. So let's spin this forward. If we go 15 years into the future, what do scenarios look like for the year 2033? Optimistically, the developmental track of artificial intelligence changes to include more diversity. And I'm not talking about just like hiring a few women and not sexually harassing them, although that would be nice. It does all of us good, and I don't have time to do it now. I will be happy to talk your head off about this later. From a data perspective, biodiversity is a good thing. Okay, so it does all of us good to be more inclusive. Norms and standards are adopted to ensure transparency. People understand how decisions about them are being made. The federal government here devotes way more money to basic research. This is basically the worst moment in time that Donald Trump could be president of this country. He's surrounded by people who are artificial intelligence deniers, and that's going to set us back, so congrats to everybody else, I guess. The government, would create new social systems to deal with technological employment that's probably coming. not writ large, but to some extent. We would see less consolidation in the commercial sector. The big nine still make money, as they should, and everybody's happy. All right, on the pragmatic side, we continue along the path that we're on right now without very many changes. Research becomes commercialized. A lot of the IP drains to China, which becomes a huge business threat. And the United States and Europe have a really hard time competing on a global stage. Catastrophically, people don't understand how decisions about them are being made, so they revolt. We have misinformation, unlike anything that we've seen before in history, which means, and then on top of all of that, because we haven't done planning, we have widespread technological unemployment without any safety net in place. We have governments that aren't prepared, and the collapse of civil society. So, 60-40 on this one. And that's not my gut, that's the data that I have access to in the modeling that I've done. All right, let's end on something a little different. Third key finding has to do with your body. So the third key finding from our report this year is that biology is emerging as one of the most important, I might even argue the most important technology platform of the 21st century. So we're looking at lots of different trends within this section. And let me get right to them. So the first has to do with CRISPR and genome editing. CRISPR is something that I think by this point everybody has heard of. There's a huge section in the report. For those of you who are not familiar with CRISPR and genomic editing techniques, that explains this in a non-science professor sort of way. So it's meant for everyday people to read. And essentially, this is cutting out pieces of genetic information such that it doesn't, in a damaging way, change the future of whatever that population is. This is a super hot area of R&D. So one of the dependencies that we look at is funding. There is so much money flowing into this space right now. So we're talking about introducing genes with a high level of precision and none of the undesired traits. So they're cool things that people are starting to do, right? So one of the applications we've seen for people who suffer from diabetes, using CRISPR so that rather than wearing a hard pack that tells you what your blood sugar level is, you would just have like a colorful tattoo that changes color on your skin depending on where your insulin levels are. Another area that we're looking at, and this is really, really interesting, is a sort of biological DVR. And for this one, we did use sort of a buzzwordy sounding phrase, but it's because the actual explanation takes a while to explain. So if you think of the DVR that you have right now, the ability to sort of pause and rewind, that's what we're talking about, but as a biological process. So this new research allows, we think, will allow us to record and store information about our cells as they age, which would allow us, on the one hand, to observe the aging process, but if we can quantify aging at a cellular level, what this tells us is that maybe we can save earlier versions of ourselves. So if you use Time Machine with Apple, this is like a time machine for your body. That got everybody excited. Another really interesting area and a trend that we're looking at is molecular self-assembling robots. So this is some work that essentially we're talking about replicating a process that exists naturally, but being able to do that programming on our own. So these are self-folding single strands of programmable DNA that can be made inside of living things. So this is work that's being done at ASU in the United States and at Harvard. But what's really interesting is that it's not brand new. So in 2010 at Caltech in California, there was autonomous robotic DNA that looked like kind of spiders that biologists programmed and then moved around the body as they wanted it to, right, for a variety of different purposes. So this has been in the works for a while. This is one of our longer trends. What this means is that this eventually leads us to a sort of plug-and-play nanomedicine. So if you use Wix or Squarespace or whatever to build your website, it's like that for the human body. Nanobots could therefore deliver targeted drugs that are designed for each one of us specifically. And the key here is autonomous, right? So rather than us taking medication, we're talking about us taking tiny little robots and biological processes that operate without, again, somebody specifically telling those systems what to do. And what would all of this technology be without a detailed map? You got to have a detailed map to help the systems know where to go. And so the last trend I'll show you before I wrap all this up is the Human Cell Atlas, which is a really interesting project and part of a new area of research. And essentially, a bunch of researchers all around the world have endeavored to map every single facet and every single cell of the human body. Once that happens, once we have a map, and once we've got the robots, really interesting things will start to happen. So let's see where this takes us, to the year 2043. In my normal line of work, this would be a little further than I would feel comfortable building strategy around, because there's so many variables and dependencies at play. However, I think I have enough data that the scenarios that I'm going to show you now are plausible, which means that they could happen. So, optimistic framing. We're healthier. We're living longer. Our bodies are being monitored continuously by smart medical systems and by us. We don't have hospital waiting rooms anymore. We don't have to go to the emergency room for everything. We don't have to take 20 different pills a day, one counteracting the other, right? There's a less probability for us in the United States, which is dealing with an opioid crisis. We will see fewer probabilities for that sort of thing to happen again, because we won't be prescribed painkillers over which we have no control to begin with. There'll be lots of new jobs, right? Think about it. The current MDs that we have aren't trained for this type of work, so we're going to need huge numbers of people who are cross-trained, right? People who are doctors and roboticists, nurses who also understand how to inject these different types of robotics, right? So this is good. People will live longer. Pragmatic framing. Pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, insurance companies, governments, they can't transition away from their current business model because they're stymied by their own thinking. They refuse to see past what they have always done. As a result, our current health systems all around the world lag behind the available technology. We wind up with a lot of strain and aggravation. And now the catastrophic framing. We don't plan ahead. So nobody plans ahead for precision medicine. The scientists keep working away in their silos. The regulators keep putting things off. Consumers, don't really care. And so not only are we not prepared for precision medicine, we're also not prepared for what becomes a massive overpopulation problem. Like we see today with our phones and our cars, the wealthy people get the latest and the greatest and the newest versions of monitoring technologies. Everybody else has to trade in their personal data for use in experiments. For them, there is no such thing as privacy. In order to deal with the overpopulation problem that we now have in wealthy nations, the autonomous systems, the robots that are living inside of us, they're the ones who decide who live and who die. And they do this using different data points. So if you're a 16-year-old kid and you get pregnant, and the system feels like you're probably on your way to be successful, the robots could sort of abort the fetus inside of you without your knowledge, because that's what's in your best interests. And for this, I would say this is really far out, so a probabilistic model here doesn't entirely apply, but I would give a 0% chance of the optimistic framing happening and a 70-30 for pragmatic and catastrophic. Now, I want you to go out and have a good rest of your day. So let me end with this, right? As much as I love Westworld, I don't think that we are living in somebody else's simulation, okay? I believe that as humans, we still have some agency. We still have the ability to choose the futures that we want, right? So if you are a business person, you have an opportunity today, when you leave, to start making smarter strategic decisions and investments. Do not get distracted by Bitcoin, right? You can invent your own crypto if you want, but do the research and the modeling first. If you're a government person, please don't wait. And please don't politicize science and technology. We deserve better than that. You have an opportunity, yes, and go home and tell people that. And I will also say, if you're a science and tech person and you have the stomach for it, please run for office. You have an ability to create structures and norms without having to write policies and regulations under duress. If you're a creative person, we need you. We need you desperately because you have an opportunity to make the future human-centered. And we need your insights. We need your background and experience. And finally, if you're a human person, now is the chance for you to be the hero of your own story. You have a chance to fight for the future that you want to live in. You have the power to create the future that you want. So, but you have to start taking action on trends in the present. So, I have some parting gifts for you. So I've got 2 links. The first one is a link to this report. It's free. You can do whatever you want with it. If you can use it in your own presentations at work, scrape from it, do whatever you want. So it's this link here. It has all of the trends. I'm going to keep showing this link a couple times. It has this non-technical primer for people who are just trying to understand what AI is. This is easy. Rip this thing out, give it to your boss, whoever you might work with. There's also a calendar. So we just curated a bunch of things that are happening that are dependencies over the next calendar year that you should have on your radar. And finally, and the trends are all listed by industry. So what I would recommend is, this is the report. It's enormous, okay? We printed out a few of them. So the trends are listed by industry. Start with your industry and go through those trends first, but then read the rest because all of these things connect together. I guess the second link is all of my IP is open. And it's open source. So take it and you can, again, it's all here in this folder for you. Please take it, use it. You can take it apart, put it back together, create your own thing with it. But my feeling is that, there's plenty of work to go around for me. I'm not concerned. I'm much more concerned about our future. And so I want more people working in a strategic way towards it. All right, so there's a bunch of different tools. Take and use whatever you'd like. The last thing is I didn't do this alone. We have some amazing authors. My creative director is somewhere in this room, Emily Caulfield, who is unbelievable. And I'm doing a book signing right after this. So if you want to, this book that I wrote called The Signals Are Talking explains the methodology. I've also brought a handful of hard copies. So if you want one, if you want me to sign a book, if you just want to ask questions since we didn't have time, meet me in the bookstore and I will chit chat for as long as you want. Thank you very much. I'll see you next year.